Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you all for coming. I think the idea is we'll probably talk, for sort of 40, 45 minutes, that kind of thing, and then, as Prona said, we can have lots of opportunity for questions. I arrived, my train was delayed, but I did manage to see the show in the gallery here beforehand, which I was very pleased about. It's looking as gorgeous as ever. It's the third time that I've seen this body of work. And the first occasion was Stephen very kindly invited me to his studio, which happens to be quite near where I live, actually, in Hackney, in East London. He has a beautiful studio off this wonderful Georgian Square in Hackney. And I think at the time I saw about 75 or so of the paintings. And on the way up today, I was thinking back to that initial conversation we had when you were telling me about this. And there was a particular phrase that has stuck in my mind, actually, where at some point, it's a throwaway thing, at some point in the course of the conversation, referring to this body of work, you said, "This isn't the first large-scale lunacy that I've been involved with." And I thought it was a very articulate and perhaps quite accurate description of the work. I hope we didn't on that occasion have time to talk about other large-scale lunacies, and I hope that maybe tonight we shall. But we should probably concentrate on the key one, Redonda.
I have also described it as my Alexander McQueen dress. The costume that you can't wear, but it leads you to look at other things. I do have form in taking on impractical projects, and I think I see it as a kind of counterbalance to what I have done for many years, what I do alongside all these big projects, which is make paintings and drawings and prints and one-off pieces of work, and that's what I did for years, and I've had exhibitions and so on. And I think over the last 10 years, I've begun to want to take ideas for a walk and explore them and dedicate time to a project and look at it from many different angles. So there are increasingly what goes on in the studio of bodies of work about something.
And in this case, I mean, it's probably worth pointing, I'm sure that pretty much everyone here has seen the show already, but this body of work consists of what? It's 101 of these, they're imaginary portraits.
Yeah, there are 101 portraits. I didn't know how many there'd be when I started, but I wanted there to be a lot, and I wanted them to, needed to be mass. There needed to be a crowd, and they are inventions from my head. The court Redonda is a real thing, as well as being fabrication. I mean, it's kind of complicated like this, that there is an island called Redonda, which is uninhabited. It's apart from penguins or puffins, whatever they're called, seagulls.
And the odd rat, I read.
There is something called a Redondan dragon, which
okay.
is a lizard that belongs nowhere else. But it's a useless lump of nothingness that lay unclaimed forever until the late 19th century, when a British merchant seaman decided if nobody else wanted it, he would have it. And I guess Britain, being as it was in the 19th century, they just took it.
And this is in the West Indies?
This is in the East West Indies. It's off the coast of Antigua. You can't see it from Antigua, but it's under their jurisdiction now. And it's very small, it's round, and it's virtually impossible to land on. It's quite a distinctive shape. I mean, from the top it is round, as the name suggests, but from boat level it looks, there's a flat cap with a steep cliff running it up. So it's useful, it's good for nothing.
Mm-hmm. I did read that it was that Columbus discovered it, possibly named it, 1493. But I can't, I mean, as with so much about Redonda and its history, I feel like trying to verify facts about it is a complete fool's errand, because part of the fun of this place is that, as you say, it's this great big lump of nothingness, and so much over the past 150 years has been projected onto it. These great shaggy dog stories, fantastical stories, very whimsical, sort of constructed surrounding its history.
It's it remains under dispute. And I lifted the idea. I played an idea by Javier Marias, who is somebody you will know is a Spanish, I guess increasingly eminent Spanish novelist. And he sent me a letter recently correcting, having read one or two interviews that I've given, correcting mistakes that I've made. So, and there's more, like a lot of things with this island, there are several truths to it, including claims to the kingdom. Javier Marias was incidentally a brief outline.
I think it's helpful.
Yeah. The merchant seaman that claimed it was called Shield, and he appointed himself king of Redonda, gave it to his son, who was a science fiction writer. This is in the late 19th century. And subsequently, this is the short version, but subsequently they decided to pass the kingdom down a literary line, so that the king of Redonda was a writer. One of them started selling off honorary titles, and this is where the dispute comes. But
is this the poet Galsworth?
Yeah.
Because, he's quite a fascinating figure in his own right. So my understanding is that M.P. Shields, the fantasy writer,
yeah.
King of Redonda,
Yeah.
his literary executor was this much younger and, I believe, I've never read the work, but very minor poet called John Galsworth.
Yeah.
Sort of grew up in Notting Hill, and middle years of the 20th century he then inherits from Shield, as it were, and becomes king. And he's the one who, I guess, sounds like he was quite a roguish sort of bohemian character, hanging out in all these rackety pubs in Notting Hill at the time and just doling out these titles, as you say, to his mates. And then presumably that's when some of this controversy arises, and there's another...
I think it is. And so there were two lines of kings. The line I followed, because this is how I discovered Redonda, was through Javier Marias, who whilst I was working in Brooklyn in 2014, I started reading this writer who I never heard of. And
so at this point, Redonda wasn't even in your...
So Redonda wasn't in my mind at that point, but I began reading him, and I didn't know who he was, but I kind of intrigued by the books. And
what are some of the things he's written?
He wrote he wrote a book called All Souls, which is based on in that case, I think, Oxford College. But A Heart So White is probably infatuations more recently. But it's quite spare writing. And I didn't know who he was. I do have a friend in Brooklyn who is professor of Shakespeare studies at Yale, I think. And he walked into my studio and looked at this book, or these books, and said, "Oh yeah, future Nobel laureate," which I sort of found kind of reassuring, I suppose.
It's good, very good validation of your natural taste, and yeah.
But I discovered he was the king of Redonda, and so I started looking at that backstory. And I like the idea that there could be this kingdom which was controlled by people who made things and roads and the Javier Marias had become appointed the king of Redonda, which he did for about 12 years, and he took it on the condition that he could appoint his own court.
Mm-hmm.
And the members of this court, the court that exists, of an island that exists, which is a fabrication, which is a fantasy, so it's full of these this kind of smoke and uncertainty. People you know of, like Almodovar and Francis Ford Coppola, and
with some fantastic titles. I think W.G. Sebald is Duke of Vertigo. Ian McEwan.
I think he's called Perro Negro.
Black Dog, yeah.
I think depending on what you do, you get a different title. If you're an artist, you're a Viscount.
So well, this is maybe jumping ahead, but since we're on the subject of titles, I sense here a motivation for the entire series. Have you been appointed Do you have a title? Are you now part of this court of Redonda?
I am a Viscount.
Of course, yeah.
I have other spurious titles, but Viscount. I'm called Viscount. He called me Viscount. He asked me what I wanted to be called, and I didn't answer the letter very quickly. And before I had written back to him, he wrote me. He writes on a typewriter. It's quite a funny one. He writes on an old-fashioned typewriter, corrects it with a fountain pen, gives it to his PA, he scans it and emails it to me. So I find myself typing out a letter, signing it,
Yeah.
and scanning it, sending it to his PA. And it it's kind of slowly does sort of work. And I didn't reply quickly enough. And he wrote back saying, well, I'm going to call you Viscount Biennale. And I wrote back and said, well, I just have to write to you. And I gave him a few alternatives, one of which was, I wanted to kind of reference colour and pigment and all that muddy stuff that I push around a flat panel. So I am called Viscount Q and I. That's all there.
And there are no sort of private ambitions for a coup or a putsch, and then suddenly Redonda will be yours.
No, I'm a happy passenger. He also sent a reprimand because he had read these things and said that I was getting some of the facts wrong.
It's good that he cares.
Yeah, and he pointed out that as far as he is aware, there is no king at the moment.
Sorry, I thought he was the king.
No, he abdicated.
I see. Right, of course. Right.
12 years abdicated.
I missed that news story.
Then there is dispute as to who the king is. He says, his line, there is currently no king.
I'm telling you, there we go. There's a vacancy. There's an opportunity here, Stephen.
Well, it came with kind of residence.
You and the seagulls and the rats.
Yeah. And perhaps build a landing station.
So, I mean, he obviously, Viscount Biennale is, of course, a reference to the fact that this body of work was shown at Venice. Where are we now? Is it last summer?
Yeah, it was
as part of the Biennale.
Around 7 months last year.
Mm-hmm. But before we come to that, because where it was shown was quite spectacular and it's fascinating in itself, just to go back, you mentioned, so around about 2014-15, you're in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, this residency, you're reading Javier Marias. Someone, a friend, sort of says, oh, have you heard about his interest in Redonda and all of this? You become fascinated with this story. And what happens at that point? Did you envisage this, because you spoke at the beginning about liking to work and create bodies of work now. Is that what drew you? Was that the appeal of this story?
I think when I'm working, I think always when I've been making a piece of work, alongside that as a way of keeping my, I guess, a kind of exercise, kind of painfully exercise. When in doubt, I paint a head. And I had.
And why do you think that is?
I think because I paint people, and I want to make individuals as opposed to sort of a generic type, and so it's a way of inventing something that is kind of extremely elementary. And if you give a child a pencil, they'll draw a face first of all, and recognise. And it's a way. It's kind of what I've always done. It's just to paint these people from here upwards. And I've been doing that for years. And it's a kind of tuning. It's a kind of way of. It's so familiar. Everybody's painted, drawing of faces. The most kind of elementary, but going back years. But everybody's different. So I do that. I was making a couple of bodies of work in Brooklyn, painting these heads alongside, found out about the Court of Redonda, and realised this could be a way of corralling these paintings. And I was painting them I have in recent years had a habit of going elsewhere for a while each year and painting somewhere else. And the easiest way of doing that is by taking little panels that size to wherever I'm going, in that case Brooklyn, and I send them out, the footers are there when I arrive, and I can just start working. And then I like the idea that if moving artwork around is a pain in the arse, and I like the idea that you could in theory just stick a stamp on the back of them and
I mean, it's worth maybe observing that, because you've described, under Javier Marias, Redonda becomes this place where very recognisable, famous people, real people, are members of the court. And you've very deliberately chosen not to allude to those people or even paint their portraits. That sounds quite pat. The point is that these are imaginary people. It's your conception of it.
It's they are, but I'm not really a portrait painter. So I mean, if I sat Antonia by in front of me, she would be insulted. And I'm not. It's not what I do. It's not what I. There's that. I would. Make go. When I'm in, there's a line which I'd like to claim was my own invention, but it's not. Of kind of art is the most efficient way of running away from home without leaving the room. And so you can, I can. I think Thomas de Quincey said that he travelled the world through his bookshelves. And I've always liked that idea that you can be in whatever the studio room is you're painting, and you can be somewhere else at the same time.
But I'm very intrigued by, so we've established that these are imaginary portraits, and, there you are, there are these, in the end, 101 wooden panels prepared, and in a sense, it's completely blank. You don't have someone sitting in front of you, you're not working from photographs, but as everyone can see in the show, it's tremendous diversity in terms of the types of people, what they're wearing, the gestures, ethnicity, gender. How do you alight upon a new person? I'm imagining it's not that programmatic, that it's presumably quite an intuitive thing. But
I think it's. I think if you're not anybody here got out a pencil and piece of paper and drew a person, there would be something about that drawing which would be the person that drew it. We draw ourselves really. And I was interested in, I live in London, I work in Hackney, brought up in West London, I live in North London, I work in East London. I was at a comprehensive school where, I saw that kind of generation where kind of diversity was certainly in London was kind of unsurprising. That's what I was surrounded with, and it wasn't a big deal. So I wanted to be inclusive, and I was surprised so I'm inventing these portraits. I'm sitting there with a panel in front of me which has a coloured ground on, and I'm drawing somebody. I draw them on in charcoal, and I'm trying to believe that person could exist.
But is it the case, from what you've just described, thinking back to memories of people you encountered at school, or just, on your commute, as it were, on your way to Hackney, are you seeing ordinary, real people, and you're thinking, that's someone I could use?
I do, and subsequently I see people and I think, redundant. And it's because I don't want to make them, I want to make the paintings alluring and, come hither and inquire and so forth. But I don't want to make them. I don't want to make the people sort of too refined. So
what's the characteristic of a redundant face or head?
I want them to look as though they've made. I want them to look as though they've got sort of something stuck underneath their fingernails. they've made things. I've always been. I think that's what they are. They're people. They're makers.
Yeah, and as you're describing, there's this kind of, I guess this is partly what animates them as works of art. That antithesis between they are very seductive as paintings, gorgeous things, as I said at the beginning, but the people themselves. I think you put it quite nicely in the catalogue. This idea that here they are at high table, the kind of people who normally would be fed in the garden shed. That sort of contrast is what's an important component.
Yeah, I kind of, I mean, I do want to, I want to elevate people for Venice is a grand place. Both Venice and Cambridge are cities which have more than their fair share of big walls covered in august individuals, whether that's the Doges or 800 years of college masters.
So how did Venice come into it? Because it sounds like you were already doing the heads, hear about Redonda, you sense that here's a new body of work. I'm imagining that at that stage it wasn't known that you were going to be doing something at the Biennale.
No, I began this. I began to realise. I guess the idea of forming this court was in my head, and I knew there would need to be a lot of them. I also knew that they would need a venue. So when I was asked whether I'd like to, that there was this opportunity to do something in Venice, that and Venice being apart from everything else that Venice is, it's also a port, the beginnings and ends of journeys, which has been which will maybe come on to later, but that's been an element of work that I've been making for a while, and on different projects and type of map making. But here was a venue big enough and appropriate enough, and at the same time I was asked to do a show here, and I think for about 2.5 seconds I thought I would do 2 different shows, and I could see purpose for one show being both in Venice and in Cambridge, going back to the business about portraiture in Cambridge. So once that was so I was in Brooklyn the last 3 or 4 months of 2014. I came back to London, was working in the studio on various things. Venice came up as an opportunity. At the end of 2015, I went to look at the venue on the last day of the 2015 Biennale, realised that this was the venue.
It's quite. I mean, it's maybe worth reflecting on the venue because it is quite a special place. I mean, it's right on the Grand Canal, right?
It's right on the Grand Canal, and it has this historical palace.
Yeah.
It is the footprint of most of these buildings is that they have a big salon with rooms off each side. The end wall of the salon looked over was on the Grand Canal at the finishing point of the regatta. And the day of the regatta in Venice, I had more attendance in the exhibition. It was a room of view.
Yes. But, the most perfect setting for, given the subject matter, here is a place for the court, impromptu, surrounded by water, the island of Redonda, and all of these rather obvious comparisons, but, perfect for it in a sense. One thing that's intrigued me is seeing it here, because, you've said it's one body of work, and I think you were offering it for sale as one body of work. It's not as if people can come along and just buy, I love that one, could I have that? But it's displayed in different permutations. So how do you go about deciding how you're going to hang it?
I do it. I mean, the practical route of doing it is by doing a paper hang to scale, 175 paper scale. But it will be configured. It can be configured in there's more than one right answer. I mean, many years ago, 15, 16 years ago, I designed some sets for the Opera House at Covent Garden, which is a kind of thrill, kind of like being keys to the biscuit tin. It's and I just made that stage. I made that set for the Royal Ballet. It finished, and I sort of naively said, "Where's it going to go next?" And they looked at me like I was a kind of total idiot, and I said, well, unless La Scala wanted or the Met wanted, it's not going anywhere because there's only 3 stages this size. And it kind of, that stayed with me. And the big projects that I've made, and I did one big project prior to one of these big pieces of prints prior to before Redonda. And they are planned then to have multiple configurations because it's a stupid thing to do in the first place, but you may as well build an iota of sanity into it.
An iota of sanity. Not too much, I hope.
No, I don't.
I mean, one of the things that strikes me that, clearly there's this wonderful, very imaginatively captivating allure to the whole idea of Redonda and the court, and you have this great retinue of, they're, the way you've painted them, clearly they're individuals, they're mavericks, bohemians, beatniks, the word ne'er-do-well sort of springs to mind, and there's something rather romantic about that. And I wonder whether those are values that in some way you feel it's important to stand up for now, in an increasingly globalised, slightly homogenised, corporatised, to coin a rather ugly word, world. Is that part of what's going on in the hinterland and the motivation for doing it?
Well, the people we keep electing, or the world keeps electing, will pointing to run things. That doesn't look particularly sensible to me. So I'm quite happy in my imagination to give it to them, to give power to those that create. They can't do a worse job.
Because whilst you were talking, they've gone now, but there were some paintings that you did show in Venice, which they're not part of the same series, but if we're moving slightly into that political territory of the kind of how to read the work, if you like, I think it was 3 paintings with a horse and a rider. And I remember seeing them in the studio, and you said, which I didn't quite get, I'll be honest, initially, but quickly did, was that they were paintings about Brexit.
Yeah, they were 3. Did they go up here?
I did see that one flashed up. Yeah.
There were 3 large paintings, large by my standards anyway, which is kind of, I think, 160 by 220 or something. And when they called that referendum, when they there's an idea that shouldn't be let loose, I made one painting of a man in a semi-precarious position on horseback. And so I made the one painting as the referendum was called. I painted the second painting as on the eve of the referendum, and the third painting was going to wait for the result. 3 stages of so the first 2 paintings are the rider on the horseback becoming in particularly precarious positions and waiting for the third to see whether he stayed on horseback or not. I think probably increasingly incorporate that kind of political view into work by Nathan, but I think I think it has to be done carefully, because most of the people I'm talking about my political beliefs with are probably on board anyway, and it can be safe territory. I think the using the horse rider, it was partly the English, particularly English, the British English tradition of equine painting. When in Italy there were people being painted crucified, in Britain they were on horseback on their estates. So there was partly that reference, but there's also this. I used to sit on the exhibition committee at the Royal Academy and throw open these. That sometimes they would say, "What exhibition would you like to do most of all?" And the one that I lobbed in was, I still think it's a great idea, particularly at that time, was getting the 3 routes of San Romano, which were initially in one room in Florence, and are now in Paris, London, and Florence, and getting them all into one room together. You could put the show on, and you wouldn't have to do the other paintings in. You have a queue on Trafalgar Square, but it would also be a sign of European cooperation and sign of unity and collaboration and so forth.
Why didn't it happen?
Well, I think I went to see. I know him anyway. A man called Larry Keith, who's head of conservation at the National Gallery, and I said to him, "How about ending on Route of San Romano?" And he said, "You've got to be kidding." I wouldn't let it evaporate.
Wow.
I think it was to do with air conditioning.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a show that, I mean, that's, those things aren't moved easily.
No.
But as a symbol, I like it. So that's the reason they're on horseback is partly a nod towards each other, and partly horses are very British things.
I mean, I don't know whether it probably is abundantly clear. I didn't see if it was flashed up, but the painting. Did you describe what happens in that final painting post-referendum result?
Well, he's about to bite the dust. I mean, he falls off the horse.
There's a rather wonderful speech bubble from memory that.
It's colourful language. I mean, speech bubble. I think that there are speech bubbles in them. I mean, speech bubbles have appeared in quite for a long time. For many years, I've been interested in depicting in paintings things that are otherwise invisible, like sound. So it's what an explanation looks like.
I'm very intrigued. You mentioned Larry Keith's take on the Royal Academy, that place. In a sense, I wonder whether there's a parallel to be drawn between the court of Redonda and then this group of artists who are themselves academicians at the Academy. I mean, in some sense, do you feel that you've been painting your peers, or this is how you wish that they could be?
It's 250 years of the Royal Academy this year, and we were all called for a photo shoot about 3 weeks ago, and just as the photographer was going to photograph, I ran behind him and took a photo of us lot, bar me, with my iPhone, and it's a pretty motley crew. Some of them look as though they've been there since the beginning.
Yes. I mean, how long have you been an academician now?
2005.
Okay, so some time. Is it for, what's the deal? Is it, I mean, at some point do you get turfed out or you're there for good?
I think you have to really, you really have to, you wear dead men's shoes or dead women's shoes, there are 80 academicians, and I think you have to really foul up to it. It has been known. I think you have to run up with a kitty or something like that. So I think you're there to leave. You get these you get these letters every now and then. They come in semi-transparent envelopes with black ribbons around it. You can see before you opened it. The one came with Julie Ayres died. But that's how you go.
And I guess there are different kind of schools of thought of how you behave and act as an academician, how involved you get with academy business. Are you one of the academicians who is keenly involved? I mean, you described sitting in this exhibition.
When I guess I was one of the younger when I was elected in my early 40s, and so that was. And I think at that point, it actually kind of came along at quite a nice time for me. I gave quite a lot for those early years. I mean, now I think I've stepped back and I'm not there so as much anywhere near as much as I used to be.
Do you feel that this is slightly off message and unplanned. Oh, Lemmy.
Lemmy.
Yeah, so there are some real people.
That was painted the day Lemmy died. And I'm not particularly. I do remember going to see Heong, but I always thought he had a good look. And actually, that's Gregory Isaacs. But so some of them do have references to particular people. And I always thought Lenny had quite a good look. I was surprised when I was painting. You can bring me back on piece of it. I mean, given where I live and who I'm surrounded, the people I'm surrounded with, friends and so forth, as to how, when I began drawing people out, when I, there was a point where I painted a black man and he didn't look right, and I did go and get someone, sit him down and draw a Caribbean guy, and just to keep to tune in, I guess,
But that, I mean, that's the exception that proves the rule generally. Yeah.
I mean, there are of the 101, there are probably 5 that are sort of vaguely an on the wing to somebody who exists.
What about the sort of stylistic sources or influences, if you like? Because it strikes me looking at it that there are a few that you could point to immediately. I mean, I first thought that one, a lot of them have that kind of turquoise background. There's a nod in the direction of maybe those sort of Northern European Renaissance portraits, but equally something from completely the other side of the world, sort of Indian painting, Asian art.
Yeah, I quite often get. I mean, I'm very badly travelled, but I look at stuff, and but often when I'm doing this sort of thing, it is supposed that I've spent time in the Far East, or a hand goes up and said, you have clearly spent time in, and it's invariably I haven't been there.
So be prepared. Yeah.
I mean, some of these were. There was also a bit of time when I was in Mexico, and some of these were painted in Mexico. And Antonia, who's here, who was really responsible for me to go in there. I was just talking to her as to whether she could identify not most of them, as to whether they had, that just was a nice.
And what about sort of Italian painting? Because I know from reading about this amazing trip you undertook soon after art school. I think this was maybe back in the 80s, on a motorbike, going around Italy, looking at the Italian primitives.
Yeah, that was good. It was whilst I was at art school, and I had a tutor. I mean, when I went to, I'd been a kind of feckless twit when I was at school, and art schools in those days would accept you without any qualifications, and I sort of liked which here is something I love, but I knew nothing and I hadn't been anywhere. But I was a diligent art student, and I had a couple of tutors who gave me a list of you should go over these, and it was kind of itinerary between Venice and just north of Rome. And I went for the first year. In the first year, went on the train with a rail pass, and the next year went on a motorbike to see places that didn't have railway stations. But I quite often think that my kind of gravitational pull as a result of that is particularly early Italian painting.
Well, I remember you saying to me it would, imagine a different trajectory to the career altogether if you'd chosen to go on a trip at that point around Spain or France.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know what would happen.
No.
I mean, subsequently, I do have a particular fondness for early Flemish painting. There's that show that was just finished of Charles I's collection. I mean, the whole lines there are as good as they get. I'm sort of making particular reference, I guess, to portraiture at this point. I mean, I think burial portraits that went in to hide Roman sarcophagi, depictions of those interred. I actually don't think portrait ever got any better than that. And they're kind of, they've got. I guess I like paints of people. I guess I kind of like soul.
What was it like? I mean, you talked about this trip, this kind of formative trip, in Italy. Returning to Venice for the Biennale with this show, very different stage of life, less feckless student, more, Royal Academician in, exhibiting in this grand palazzo. What was your experience like then? I mean, how did you find the Biennale, which can be quite an overwhelming thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's Venice is Venice, and that's spectacular and gorgeous and lovely. Venetian painting, but when Venice was the powerhouse, from where I'm coming from and what I particularly love, Venice is kind of a bit late.
Right. Yes.
Tintoretto is slightly, Tintoretto is kind of rock, heavy rock music, isn't it? And it's not really my fault, but the Carpaccios in San Giorgio are extraordinary.
But it's interesting.
But then, I sometimes, and Philip de Barlow actually, who was doing the British Pavilion last year, she said to me at Venice, the Biennale is out of date. And I just, I kind of know what she means, in that, there are perhaps more experimental, significant, but it is Venice and it's the biggest and it's there and it's somebody who has an ongoing love affair with Italy. It was kind of irresistible.
Well, I think it's very revealing that your response to my question there about Venice was to think about the historical art, that is there in the city. When in a sense I meant more the Biennale, because of course there is this great explosion, this exhibition of contemporary art. Were you spending a lot of time looking, going around the Giardini, going to the Arsenale?
I think I probably saw most of it. I was there a lot. As I was going back and forward, I had somewhere, where the gallery was, had an apartment in it, so I could stay throughout, so I was going back and forward, and I saw, and it's, it's a wide range of some extraordinary work, and some amusing work, so that, but that's kind of what it should be. It's kind of covering, is people being given rein
and it's worth pointing out as well that this, because you mentioned Philip de Barlow was the official British representative in the British Pavilion in the Giardini for the Biennale, but the Court of Redonda was a collateral event, it's called, so it was actually part of the Biennale as well.
Yeah, how it works is there are the national pavilions. I don't know how many exhibitions go on in Venice during the Biennale, but hundreds. So there's one each. Well, many countries have national pavilions which happen in a garden at one end of the island. And then there are, in this, I think last year there were 22 collateral events, and that's they are events that they're given collateral status by the court, by the curator who oversees the Biennale, and so it's that's kind of being brought into the fold. But she had I can't remember her name, so if you don't ask me, but she had a particular interest in migration and the diaspora and I think Redonda kind of fell into that brief.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I suspect it might be a good moment to throw it open to questions from the floor. So there are these two mics and at the back. So if anyone does have any questions, then maybe it's worth waiting for a microphone. It's possible that Stephen has spoken exhaustively about it, but there's a question here at the front.
Stephen, I didn't know anything about Venice. This is the first time I am seeing it in this context. I wonder, how did it feel to you now having it in this context, and if there is any future of this piece, but particularly you already experienced these two locations. How did it speak to you being in that particular domestic location and being in this location? What is the difference? How much this context contributed or not contributed to the piece itself?
I knew this space. I was interested in the two different types of space. The very elaborate Venetian palace. When it's not being used for the Biennale, it is somebody's home, and there is. I could have left all the furniture in. Clearly, wall spaces were required, but the I think photographs probably came behind the chandeliers were extraordinary in this, kind of beams. And a lot of people said, I guess, have expressed concern as to what it was going to be like in a more contemporary environment. I mean, for me, I was never going to be. I mean, I was interested. I guess it's got to be feasible. You've got to work in more than one environment. But I was looking forward to the complementary difference between the two. And I guess in Venice it was more of a sort of salon hang, and in a more contemporary space, the really beautiful gallery that's here, that I can think of it and pull the gaps in between the paintings is smaller. If you take 5 centimetres off that space, it can become something that can swell or shrink. So I was interested to see both spaces.
And is this going anywhere else?
There's lots of talks of it going to other places. I think the most solid of those conversations is going to China, which I think may happen, but that's quite tricky negotiations.
And then there's a question just here.
Yes, I saw it in Venice, and then I've seen it here. And first of all, it's fantastic to see them all again. I feel there's a sort of colourful homogeny about them. But I want to know whether you put them in a different order in the formality of the Dandolo versus the contemporary space here. Do you mix and match them? Do you dream up the whole time? Is it hung completely differently?
It is hung differently. I mean, there are partnerships within it which probably appeared in both. When I was making them, I would make the paintings and then I put them on the wall and made the next one. And it was painted really once between it was painted the first half dozen that were painted in Brooklyn. The remaining 95 or whatever it is were painted in a period of about 14 months. And they would be painted on the wall to the second frame, they're coming back, and they would go up alongside one another, and some of that was serendipitous, but there were, I was becoming a sort of dating agency really, and I'd give them to talk to each other. I mean, it's hung, this here is hung from a paper hang, I think I mentioned before. And those the scale of those were big enough so you can see the images, and as they were printed out, it's quite a nice document. It's a big scroll that I am making partnerships or collect groups. They're not. It's not hung in order of which they were made. So, and certainly whilst I was making them, there were some moments when they were coming. They were being sort of brewed in my brain and falling out of my arm and onto the surface a lot more fluidly and articulately than others. There were moments when I was kind of on a carpet and it was flying, and other moments when it was a bit more limp. But wherever it's shown, it will be different.
I remember you saying that at one stage you thought of grouping them almost like a sort of map of the island, that sort of sense.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's such a distinctive. I mean, I think there's photographed in the catalogue. I mean, it's such a distinctive shape particularly from the boat or from water level. And I think originally, when I first started painting them, they were just going up on the wall, and some of them would go upside down and sideways, and depending where the nails were. And I think initially I wondered about doing that. But there was an idea, maybe it happens one day, of it representing it being the shape of this island, because the island is there. I mean, the colour-wise of it, there's very little red in the court of Redonda.
Mm-hmm.
The brown and the green and the blue that's the colour of the Redondan flag. I mean, yes.
Someone has said, yeah.
Which are those colours.
There's a question right at the back there.
I love the phrase brewed in the brain. I think you just said about how some of the characters sort of spilled out of you. I was just wondering, was that completely organic, or did you sort of think, oh, I've done this many men, I ought to do that many women, or anything like that?
I was concerned of trying to bring in diversity. I wasn't necessarily counting. I did go and count earlier. Corona reckoned there were 25 women. I counted 41, and about 4 that I wasn't particularly sure about. I wasn't. I was making individuals, and not. I wasn't particularly paying that. I guess I was. And there were certainly references to different origins and different ages, and so I was aware of it, but I wasn't trying to be too precise, I guess.
There's a microphone coming to the lady upstairs, but if anybody else wants to ask
Then we'll come to you.
As a Viscount and someone who clearly has a lot of influence with the court, in the post-Brexit world, do you think you could persuade Redonda to do a trade deal with us?
I'm seeking a passport. There is a pub in Southampton which declared itself, on the announcement of the smoking ban, it declared itself the Redondan embassy. And it didn't work.
There's a question down here as well, if we're still waiting.
I think we're there, but
having finished the Redonda series now, did you kind of experience sort of a bereavement after being so fired up with an idea and seeing that through, or have you got other ideas that you're already working on, or do you take
That's an interesting question, because it was a weird year. I was really in the studio all the time, I stopped working on them a year ago, and it took quite a long time to kind of get back. I mean, there are things going on in the studio now, but there are 2 bodies working on the studio, but there was quite a fallow gap of what am I doing now? And I kind of like the idea of doing paintings of people hiding, kind of the subject. We're looking at the person that thinks the cop is thing, which is something that I'm playing with now. There are 2 or 3 paintings which are called throwing a shoe at the president, which is an idea that comes from a press conference we witnessed some years ago when George W. Bush was giving a press conference in Iraq, and local journalists took their shoes off and started throwing them at him, and the expression on his face was memorable. He clearly had no knowledge of the significance of this. And then there are a couple of paintings called Blown Up Parliament, which are people hiding in gunpowder barrels. But these are quite big paintings, and I'm having worked intensely in that kind of block of space, with the size of those panels, the majority of which are 39 by 49. You kind of got that box of space, and kind of stepping back and making bigger paintings. But it was more disorientating than I had anticipated it to be.
There was a question, I think, somewhat there. Yes, you got a mic.
Yeah, Stephen, can you hear me?
Yes.
You've said Redonda honours creativity over hereditary privilege. How comfortable do you think they sit in Downing College, the gated community?
Well, that's maybe that's a question for members of Downing College, because certainly it's anybody that's can come through a Cambridge college, I think, is extremely fortunate. I was arts in residence here 20 years ago, where I met Isam, and I was an outsider on the inside then, and I left school with no qualifications, and suddenly I had all the privileges of being part of this, and I was surrounded by, I met people there, that I'll know forever, and those kind of, and they were good at what they did, and I think that's I think there's nothing quite so sexy as a good education, I don't know what the statistics are about the intake from into Cambridge, but I hope it can be on merit.
Are you hoping that some of the characters' fashion sense and personalities might rub off on the students?
Sorry, I can't.
Are you hoping that some of the characters' fashion sense or personalities might rub off on the students and fellows?
Yeah, it's quite a lot been said about the clothing of Redonda, and there ain't much branding. You see, it's well, I'm not very good. I leave out the difficult bits, or leave out the bits I can't do. There's very little shadow in paintings that I make, and they could almost. They're quite flat. And there was a point years ago. There are 3 paintings in a room here somewhere from when I was resident here, of paintings I was making at the time. But actually, this shirt is a legacy of where people were covered in dotty faces, and that was really trying to make flatness. And in a way, the clothing that's on the portraits in Redonda are a way of suggesting that somebody isn't completely flat. It's like kind of taking, it's a contour. But they're kind of to animate what might be. I don't think anybody's going to offer me a dress line.
I realise that I didn't ask a very obvious question, which is, is there a king?
Well, depending on who you ask. But in this letter from Harriet, as the most recent one, he tells me there is no. He's abdicated.
He's abdicated, but I want in the group of pictures. Did you paint one?
No.
Why?
Because I don't want to be responsible for annoying anybody. I also have. I could put my favourite one in, but I don't know what that one is. I think I'll keep it as a kind of Lord of the Fries free for all.
Wonderful. Well, if we don't have any other questions, well, there is a question here, so we do have time.
Having spent a bit of time being around Cambridge University and what it does, do you think practical fine arts is something the university should be offering?
I always thought that they appointed an arts residence because there was no fine arts department. I don't know any of this for certain, but I know that Oxford has the Ruskin, and from what I could see, that the university works by having in position people who can answer any question, and there being no fine art department seems to be kind of obvious hole. I don't know, some of you guys I'm sure know more, have got more overflow with this than I am. I think that, I don't know what the position of what used to be called, maybe still is called Anglia Ruskin, whether that's been kind of brought in to the university more, but I can't remember this verbatim, but I think, and I can't actually remember, I think George Bernard Shaw said it, beyond fine art, all education is torture. And you know, kind of artists, and if you make work, you're inquisitive, and that's part of, I think an artist's job is to, there are artists here amongst, we make decisions, and we take ideas and make decisions. And I think it's an artist's job to be curious and inventive, and I think that's kind of quite creativity isn't reserved for an artist, but I think it's something that they do.
I think people would probably agree that the show and the body of work is going to stimulate that same sense of that spirit of curiosity, that slightly maverick. I think we could do with more of that in our public life, perhaps all our lives. Maybe I'm speaking for myself. I hope that the court will make it to China.
Yeah, I think it's going to China.
Yeah, that's exciting. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and explaining the story of the Court of Redonda this evening. It's been a great pleasure to hear you, so thank you.
Thank you, Alastair.